Hey, it's Jeff Hyman, your startup therapist, where we focus on the people part of startups. You know, one of the most important part of the people part of startups, of course, is attracting the right people to your startup. And a lot of that goes around what's predictive, what's not predictive. And I have not only a phenomenal guest, but probably, I'm going to use the word legend, Jeff. Is that okay?
Oh, stop it. Stop it. You're too kind to me, Jeff.
Geoff Smart.
Legend in my own mind.
Yeah, all right. Geoff Smart and I have known each other for quite some time. And his background is so uniquely qualified for this topic. And we're going to spend the next 15, 20 minutes really diving into it in a pretty hard-hitting kind of way. Jeff, let me introduce you real briefly, and then we'll get going. So, Jeff, you're based in Denver, and about 20 years ago, you started ghSmart, which I suppose are your initials, right?
Yes.
And the real,
because unlike you, your parents, my parents decided to spell my name with a G.
Yeah.
So yes, ghSmart.
There you go, perfect. And the mission of the business, as I understand it, is to really help leaders of businesses hire and develop amazing, talented teams to deliver results.
That's it.
It's a really nice focus.
So you and I share the passion.
This is all that I care about. This is my sole focus. I know it's something very important to you, and you've written best-selling books about it. You've interviewed, or your firm has assessed, 15,000 people?
Yeah.
Over the past 20 years.
Yep, all size companies, entrepreneurs, big corporate types, everybody in between, heads of state. Yep. Yeah, so it's the largest data set of these types of interviews in the world.
Great, and so we're hoping you'll share some of that findings with us. I know there's a couple of HBS cases written about you. Best-selling book Who, which is a book that really inspired me. So let's get into it. Did I capture most of that right?
Yeah, it was good. I think I don't know if it's one of the most important topics. This topic you and I share a love of. The last few conference board studies I've seen, Harvard surveys of CEOs ranks hiring talent as the number one topic in business management today.
Correct. And I will add to that it's getting tougher because we're now at a time of 5% inflation, 5% unemployment, which is basically like 1% unemployment for talented, well-educated professionals, white-collar professionals. It's become the war of talent 2.0 is on, right?
You bet.
So let's talk about how to do it. I'm going to start with a quote that I know you're very familiar with by Jim Collins from Good to Great, and he says that the most important decisions we make as business leaders are the who decisions, not the what decisions. In other words, who to have on the bus as opposed to where to take the bus, correct?
Correct.
So give us your 60-second interpretation of that. Why have you learned in these 15,000 executive assessments that statement is true?
Yeah, because it's kind of like if you had the chance to interview one person and find out their whole career story, what they did, how they did it, what worked, what didn't work. But rather than just have one person, we have 15,000 people, and just looking at the data, it's very clear that what matters and what doesn't matter in making your venture successful. And your last guest, David Cohen from Techstars, he said, what the top three things were, the team, the team, the team, and our data is no different. So I think, and what's interesting today, actually more so than when I did my startup back 20 years ago, I felt like I had to evangelize that is so important to build talented teams. Today, and thanks to Jim Collins and others, everyone sort of knows it's really important, and yet they can't find the discipline or the motivation to follow the steps that give you the best result.
And also the time. This is not a quick fix, but if you invest the time, it seems to be the best way to drive ROI and results and revenue growth for your startup and your business.
Yeah.
So you've done these 15,000 assessments.
Yep.
What percent of people, I know you're fond of the term A player, what percent of people are A players? And then from there we can get into how do you figure out who they are?
Sure. Yeah. So definition. So the way we think of an A player is people in the top 10% of talent available at a certain pay level. Okay. So, like for example, if you're hiring your first chief financial officer for your startup, you finally grown, you need a finance person. Do you hire an A player accountant at $50K a year? Do you hire an A player, controller at $75K a year? Do you splurge and get a real CFO A player for $250,000? So it's for whatever comp level
Right.
you're paying, there is a pool of people available, and the
Right.
question is, are you getting the cream of the crop working for you?
So I've already learned something. So what you're saying, Geoff, is figure out how much I can afford to pay.
Yeah.
Let's say $100,000 for this, my first CFO.
Yep.
If I can find and hire someone that's in the top 10% of people at that range,
Correct.
That's the definition of an A player.
Yeah, and I love it. I love that definition of A player because it basically takes your entrepreneurs who are watching this and shakes them by the lapel and says, "Hey, you're already paying for A talent.
Right.
The question is, are you getting it?" And and we're so busy as entrepreneurs, and so much seems to matter. But if I guess you can convince yourself that nothing matters more than having the right team, then it kind of justifies putting the energy into this important priority and getting a good result. I actually don't think it takes more time over the long haul. It just takes more like upfront time.
Yeah, it's upfront time.
Yeah.
But as you know, being an entrepreneur, 20 years at this, it's always tough to find that time, right? There's so many competing priorities. So does the rest of the distribution of people matter, the B and C and D players, et cetera, or does it really not matter?
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
I think all of us are good at a small number of things. And if you can get out there and find the people who are really good at the very specific things you need for a very specific job, that's when great things happen. That's when people are happy and engaged at work and thrilled to come to work rather than hating it. That's when you get this like incredible performance out of your team. And unfortunately, when hiring managers cut corners or just sort of go with the next warm body, it's really a disservice to themselves and to the people that they're bringing into the organization.
By attracting and retaining A players to each seat, you can build a culture that's just unstoppable and innovative, and your startup has a much better chance of success.
Yeah, man.
Okay.
Jeff Booth is one of the entrepreneurs. He's a YPO EO guy out of Vancouver. He had read the Who book like you and implemented the concepts and had in this story he actually tells in our Power Score book, the most recent one about leading your teams. So I'm able to share it because I'm not breaking client confidence. But he had a kind of stagnating building materials supply company, and they're all chasing the what stuff, chasing the customer problems, chasing pricing problems, that kind of thing. And he just sort of had this epiphany one day. All right, he's going to just really crank up the talent on the team, even shift the mix of who he was hiring, and they ended up tripling their business over just 3 years. And I toured his office, and they were building out and acquiring the office, the building next door, and they're growing like gangbusters. And he just seemed so happy and thrilled. But it's really a mindset shift where you go from just almost in a frenetic pace solving the problem of the day to taking like one zenful deep breath and saying, you know what, I'm going to build the best darn team in our industry, and then live or die based on their talent, and it ends up just going much better.
Do you buy the old statement that A players hire A players, and so it really cascades from the top down, or have you found that not to be the case?
Yeah, yes, it definitely cascades. So someone, in fact, Jeff himself, I'll just pick on him again, mentioned the first two hires as he was doing this big upgrade were really hard, right? Because you have to go to the A players, convince them why this is a good opportunity. But once you get those two in, and I'm a big fan of treat people well, pay people well, you have your A players, they're happy, all of a sudden, they'll start attracting all these other A players, and it compounds.
And if you get it wrong from the beginning, it's very difficult to turn that around.
It's so true, and you can't. We've worked with hundreds of companies, across all these cases, and I've never once seen B and C players just poorly match people, whether it's culture mismatch or skill mismatch. Suddenly attracting A players, it just doesn't happen. It's like a impossible.
Yeah, it's probably easier to take a do-over or a mulligan, clean house, tell your investors, hey, we're going to lose 6 months, and rehire.
Yeah, you've been around the venture world long enough to know that that's a really hard decision to make.
Yeah.
But oftentimes when folks sort of clear the decks and start over and have the right people, as painful as it is, it's the right thing or the only thing that can save the company.
So in these 15,000 assessments that your firm has done, and by the way, your firm has, 80 consultants across the world?
Yeah, we're up to 70 people. We're a global boutique, but we're happy. We're happy with our growth rate.
You're meeting with these executives, professionals, 15,000 of them done. Have you discovered any predictors of success, DNA, if you will, that are consistent regardless of industry or function or role? Or would you say that you've learned it really does vary based on the role? In other words, any generic worldly ones?
Yeah, we have 3 generic worldly ones, and this is new, and this is since the Who book came out. So, and this is a shift. It surprised me. We did, so let's see here. So the headline is there are 3 universals.
Yep.
And people who are leaders, entrepreneurs who are good at these 3 things are 20 times more likely to be successful, according to our data, than leaders who aren't. So that was a big shock. I used to say when I was out on the stump giving speeches, it all depends on the situation, and scorecards are highly context specific. So I was wrong. Actually, as it turns out, we took 17 years of data on all these assessments. We looked at, and these are 4 or 5 hour interviews.
Right.
It's hundreds of data points per interview, what they did, what the outcomes were. So it's the largest database of its kind. We took 3 years to analyze, just looking for, was there any holy grail, these things that predict success.
And these are, before you reveal, because I'm so excited, I'm going to write these down.
Yeah.
This is regardless of role, function, industry. It's not just CEOs and executives. It could be my receptionist or a software developer.
The population we study would be mid-level management and above. So it's not a bunch of individual contributors.
Okay, so
really
let's just
managers and leaders.
We just need that caveat, right? It's not really necessarily individual contributors.
Now, figure skaters, garbage collectors, and teachers. Maybe there's a different set of 3 things, but for like managers and leaders of any types of organizations.
So what are the 3?
All right, so here's the drum roll. The 3 things that matter most in predicting your success as a leader are, number 1 is, do you have the right priorities on your team? Like if I polled your team and said, hey, does Geoff have the right priorities? If you get low ratings, it's not good. If you get high ratings, being able to prioritize and say what we're doing and what we're not doing turns out to be a really important skill. It's also kind of rare. Only 14% of the leaders in our sample were good at prioritizing.
The others try to take on too much. Or they don't have the intellect to figure out what matters most here.
I think that's right. Or they just sort of allow for there to be just too many priorities, and there's the priority of the day. Entrepreneurs are horrible at this. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm kind of ADD myself.
Right.
So so the right answer there is prioritize. Smaller is better than more. The second big predictor of success in leading your teams is who's on the team. Okay. So that's not a shocker, but it showed up. Only 14% of leaders in the sample are good at hiring and developing talented teams. So that's interesting. So it's pretty uncommon folks to be really good at that. The third and final one was relationships that are focused on results. So there are tons of leadership books. I got a bunch of books. You got a bunch of books I see there. Most of them in leadership, in the whole field of leadership and management, are about how to build relationships and be authentic and get along and all that. And we're like, getting along is important, but getting results is more important. So it's the relationships focused on results piece.
And those, just so I'm clear, Geoff, those relationships can be internal or external?
Yep, it's both, and that's very wise of you to point out. And so you have the relationships within the team and organization, as well as with constituents on the outside, customers, suppliers, that kind of thing. But as a leader, the question on that one is, do you build relationships focused on results? 47% of the leaders do, so that one's actually more common than the other 2. So the 3 together are P for priorities, W for who is on the team, and R is for relationships focused on results. And just because it spells PWR, power, that's why we said that this is your power score.
This is your new book that I see behind you, I'm assuming.
Oh, where? And we even made it P.
Yeah, got it.
That's it. And it's your formula for leadership success. And I like it too because it's easy to run meetings like that.
Sure.
Too. Folks, do we have a priority problem? Do we have a who problem?
Right.
Do we have a relationship problem? And you and I both seen when a leader tries to solve the wrong type of problem. Our product's wrong. Well, hey, guess what? The product's not wrong. Your product designer is the wrong product designer, that kind of thing.
Got it. So that's fascinating. So those 3 things, how much more important are those universal truths or universal DNA versus the specific ones that I know you're going to tell us to encourage us to identify for the specific role in my specific company, in my specific industry? How much time should I put on those 3 and focus versus the specific ones?
Yeah, let's see here. I'm struggling with the question. I like it. It's a hard question because the process of getting the interviews done follows sort of the same
I
process.
see.
But what you listen to or what you ask for follow up examples around would be probably less around specifically going for the universals and more for going around what they've accomplished that's relevant to the role you're hiring them for. So I'd say it's more of the latter of those two choices.
I understand. Now I'm gonna bust your chops a little bit on something that you said.
Bust away.
That you said.
Please.
You snuck in there a 4 to 5 hour interview.
Yeah.
Now, I guess a couple of things. In a perfect world, of course, you'd love to spend that much time with a candidate, keeping in mind that you have multiple candidates. So if you're interviewing 5 people for a role, you do the math. I think that's about 20 hours. But more importantly, in startups, where many of the candidates might have less years of experience, fewer years of experience, can you take some shortcuts and trim that 4 to 5 hours to something less, etc.? How do you balance being a CEO of a busy company with that number?
Yeah. So a CEO of a busy company only has one key hire per year, a couple really key hires per year, where you would wheel out the heavy artillery, where you're personally sitting, not with all 5 finalists, to do the 3 or 4 hour interview or 3 hour interview or 2 hour interview if the candidates have a really short track record. But let's say through a screening process where you have other people screening candidates, they're looking at 10 or 15 candidates, right? You're not wasting your time yet. And then by the time you pick the 2 or 3 finalists, not 5, not 8, not 10, but 2 or 3 finalists, sitting down for 3 hours to really, really understand the career history of these 3 finalists, let's say CFO candidates who are going to manage your money and raise your next round of financing or not, right? I mean, it's really important.
You can't afford not to put in the time.
You can't afford not to. It's the only way to get the 90% hiring success rate that we tout in the WHO book. It's the thing. So when I was at the beginning of my startup years, I did my PhD on this topic, which is how venture investors evaluate the CEOs that they invest in.
Yeah.
And the only thing, this is my PhD dissertation, I just blew the dust off it. The only thing that really predicted accuracy of evaluating people in my study, I collected data on 86 deals. I mean, it was a pretty big data set, was that sit down time for a couple hours really.
So it really does work if you're willing and able to invest the time.
Yeah, it works. If you're willing to invest the time, and it works better than any other alternative use of that time.
Because many of the viewers are perhaps founders or run a smaller startup and they're looking for individual contributors. Let's say the individual contributor is 30 years old, so they've got 9 years work experience. Is there a rough guideline of how much time I should invest with
2 hours.
2 hours.
So here's the deal. So with a 30-year-old, the steps, so if you skip any of the following 4 steps, you're not going to get 90% success on your hiring, and you're going to lead a life of misery. If you do these 4 steps on your 30-year-old, you'll have a 90% chance of success. The 4 steps are, one is you got to write out the scorecard, is what we call it, which identifies the outcomes you really want them to achieve in the role. Outcomes, like revenue targets, actual outcomes. Right. The second thing is you source people from multiple different sources. We can talk more about that.
But especially focused on your direct personal relationships and network.
Your direct personal relationships. You bug
your employees.
You get really good candidates that way versus, just broadcasting out to the internet or, LinkedIn and stuff. Yeah. 4 is these interviews, and it's in there that you do the couple hour interview on your 30-year-old if they're the finalist candidate. And then 4th is we call it sell, which is, the little checklist to keep in your mind to make sure that they say yes once you give them an offer.
I'm going to come back to sell in just a second because I think that's misunderstood by a lot of people. We got about 3 minutes left.
Sure.
The selection process.
Yes.
How many candidates should I be? So let's say I'm looking for a CFO. The stakes are very high. How many do I need to see to feel comfortable that I've got the winner, the A player amongst that group? Is it 3? Is it 5?
It's at the sourcing step, you source a list of 25. At the screening step, you have other people, not you, just anybody else. For gosh sake, just get someone other than you to do the initial, kind of phone interviews and just kind of check in with folks on where they are in their careers. with, what did I say, about 25 source, phone screens on about 6 or 7.
Yep.
And then up to 6 or 7, where you've got, resume and LinkedIn, and you've got interview notes from someone on the 6 or 7. I don't know, pick 2 at a time.
Yeah.
And only 2, that's it. And then you wheel out the heavy interview, the reference checks, all that kind of jazz. If those 2 go, if you go 0 for 2 on those, then you got to reload, get another couple. But yeah, you're not doing a lot of interviewing on tech candidates. That's a big misconception. Entrepreneurs invite people in.
Yeah, they see 10, 20 people for a half hour. Isn't that worthless?
No. That's exactly the opposite way to do it.
Let's be really clear, to use what I'm guessing is your terminology. It is not predictive of success.
Correct.
It's as close to a waste of time, if not a coin toss. You might as well flip a coin. It's
funny because we see companies sometimes brag about how many interviewers are interviewing a candidate for a first round interview. But if I hear the numbers more than 1 or 2, I'm like, oh my gosh, what a waste of time that is.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, last topic. Let's talk about sell. So we're talking about A players, people in the top 10% for the compensation bracket you described.
Yes.
These people have a lot of choices. They may not be actively looking. They're currently in a role where they're tearing it up and kicking ass, etc.
Yes.
You described this seemingly nice 4S process, and you had sell at the end.
Yeah.
We both know that you got to start selling earlier in the process.
Yes.
How do I do that, and how do I invest that time, and how many candidates am I selling, and what is the most important part of selling?
Yeah. It's funny. The corporate types I teach and train have a harder time with this because they're like, I work at a really famous company. You should want to work here. Yeah. And it's like the end. The entrepreneurs in your audience are naturally pretty good and scrappy at selling, right? The value proposition. I'd say that the things that I see entrepreneurs do really well is when they're sitting with people as early as the early phone screens or as late as the final deep dive who interview. They're really trying to figure out the 2 or 3 things that matter most to that person, and you have 5 choices, but you got to figure out what the 2 or 3 things are, and it's either fit to the work, fit, family, some kind of family thing, some kind of flexibility, hours,
or a tie to a certain city or something.
You bet. Geography. Hey, I have an aging parent in Milwaukee. I got to live in Milwaukee. Whatever. Fortune. Money. What is the money number that's going to get him or not get him? Cash, equity, bonus, etc. Freedom. This is a weird one, but people who leave big companies for entrepreneurs or other entrepreneurial hops, people want to have freedom. And then fun, what's actually fun. And it's interesting. Rarely people have all 5 things are important. It's usually 1 or 2, and you got to figure out which 1 or 2, and then you pound away on making sure that obstacle goes away
throughout the whole process. It's not just one conversation. So what I hear you saying, Geoff, is in that initial discussion, I kind of want to say what's most important to you, what would convince you to make a change, et cetera, et cetera. I jot it down, and it becomes the objection that I need to remove throughout the process. What you're describing is a very consultative sales process. This is sales and marketing, not HR.
Sales and marketing 101. And Geoff, if you use the actual word or term they use as you're trying to remove the obstacle, that helps. That helps also. And I just think that if this is kind of a weird thing to say, but you shouldn't try to oversell someone if it's not a good match. That's something I see entrepreneurs doing where, this person's a rock star. We want to disguise the fact that something's really bad. It's no, don't do that.
Yeah.
In the field of industrial psychology, we call it realistic job preview. But bottom line is, if there honestly is a good match to be had here, then speak the language of the candidate, identify the obstacle, and pound away at it and get them. But if you do uncover something where it's just not a match, regardless of how talented they are, you got to wave off.
You are clearly gifted and a master at this. And so how can people reach you, Geoff? How can they learn more about the firm, and what books should they be reading? Because I know you've published some amazing bestsellers.
Yeah, they don't really need to reach me. I'm not a huge social media type person. I do think these books end up being very helpful tools. So the Who book is #1 on Amazon for hiring. So of all books, that's it. Power Score just came out this last year, was a top 10 business and management book of 2015 and a Wall Street Journal bestseller. So this one's How to Hire Your Team, Who. This one's How to Run Your Team, Power Score. I'm at ghSmart.com, and we'll have an event later this year in the fall. I'm hosting it. It's called SmartFest 2016 Denver. We'll have it's a limited seating kind of thing, but stay tuned for details on that, where people can come learn these skills, bring a couple of their teammates, and hopefully improve their chances of success.
It sounds amazing. Thank you for investing the time with us. We appreciate it. I'd love to have you back at some point. We'll go into something in more detail.
Anytime. Thanks, Geoff. It was fun.
Thank you, Geoff.